Welcome to Crime World, where we delve into real-life stories of crime, betrayal, and justice. In this episode, we travel to Mobile, Alabama, in November 2013, a city rich in Southern charm, but hiding a dark secret a decorated war hero, Sergeant Shawn Sullivan, had. Survived the perils of battle only to fall victim to a betrayal far closer to home. His death was initially believed to be a tragic result of his injuries. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a shocking tale of deceit, greed, and murder. Sergeant Shawn Sullivan, 35, was a decorated Army veteran who had devoted nearly half his life to serving in the military, born and raised in Mobile, Alabama. Shawn had always dreamed of following in his father's footsteps. His father, Stephen Sullivan, had served in Vietnam and instilled in him a deep sense of duty. After graduating from Murphy High School in 1996, Shawn enlisted in the Army, quickly earning a reputation for his discipline and courage over the years. He completed multiple tours in Afghanistan, receiving commendations. For his leadership under fire, Shawn married Jillian Sullivan, 30, in 2009. After a whirlwind romance, they'd met at an Army medical center where she worked as a nurse assistant. He was immediately drawn to her beauty and undeniable sex appeal before meeting Jillian. Shawn had never been the type to settle down. He loved women and sex too much to imagine committing to just one partner for life. But something shifted when he met her. Jillian was unlike anyone he had ever known. Their chemistry was electric and they connected on every level, especially in the bedroom. Jillian's sexual energy and stamina were unmatched. Shawn couldn't get enough of her or her body. But in 2012, Shawn's life took a tragic turn. While on a mission in Kandahar, an IED explosion left him severely wounded and partially paralyzed. After months of rehabilitation at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, he was honorably discharged, returning to Mobile. He faced the daunting challenge of adjusting to civilian life while using a wheelchair. Despite his injuries, he refused to let his condition define him. He took a job as a security consultant, advising local businesses on risk management. His dream was to one day open his own security firm. In the beginning, Jillian stood by his side, helping him adjust to his new reality. But over time, Shawn failed to see the changes in her, the resentment that slowly crept into their marriage. By November 2013, Shawn was focused on moving forward. He had begun researching online courses in business management at the University of South Alabama and was networking with other veterans who had started their own security firms. Though he still struggled with pain, he remained hopeful. Shawn, ever the optimist, believed their best years were still ahead. His love for Jillian was unwavering. He trusted her completely. What he didn't know was that she no longer felt the same way as he planned for their future. She was making plans of her own plans that would leave him dead before the month was over. Early on the morning of November 15th, 2013, at exactly 6:45, Jillian Sullivan dialed 911 from her home in a quiet suburban neighborhood of Mobile, Alabama. Her voice trembled as she told the dispatcher that her husband, Shawn Sullivan, wasn't breathing. She claimed she had woken up beside him and found him unresponsive. Within minutes, emergency responders from Mobile Fire Rescue arrived at the modest brick house on Peanut Hill Drive. They found Shawn lying motionless on the couple's bed, his skin pale and cold to the touch. The bedroom was dimly lit with the covers neatly draped over his lower body. A half-empty bottle of prescription painkillers sat on a nightstand beside an empty protein shake cup. The scene appeared peaceful. No overturned furniture, no signs of a struggle, and nothing that immediately suggested foul play. Jillian, still wearing a sheer nightdress, stood near the doorway, sobbing uncontrollably as paramedics worked over Shawn. His pulse was gone. His body had already begun to stiffen slightly, suggesting he'd been dead for several hours by 7 a.m. He was officially pronounced dead One of the paramedics familiar with Shawn's medical history suspected that complications from his war injuries, perhaps a blood clot or cardiac failure, had taken his life in his sleep. Shawn's fellow veteran, some of whom arrived at the house after hearing the news, were devastated. The idea that their brother-in-arms had simply died in his sleep felt like a cruel twist of fate by Hughes. On November 15, 2013, detectives Owen Morrison and Imani Duncan from the Mobile Police Department arrived at the Sullivan residence. Morrison, a seasoned investigator with 20 years of experience, had worked countless homicide cases, immediately took note of Jillian Sullivan's behavior. Her sobbing seemed excessive, almost rehearsed. She clutched a framed wedding photo of herself and Shawn, staring at it, and kept repeating how much she had loved Shawn, as if on cue, every time an officer passed. As Morrison questioned Jillian, she explained that they had eaten dinner together the night before while watching an episode of NCS, one of Shawn's favorite shows. She said she had gone tubed around 10:30 p.m. kissing him goodnight as he took his evening pills. She hadn't noticed anything wrong until she woke up at dawn. Duncan, known for her keen attention to detail, examined the bedroom carefully. Something felt off. If Shawn had suffered a medical emergency during the night, why hadn't Jillian noticed anything sooner? The bed looked too undisturbed for a man who had supposedly died in his sleep. Then there was the bottle of prescription painkillers on the nightstand. Sat an empty protein shake cup next to the pill bottle. A faint sticky residue lined the inside of the cup, something that didn't seem right for a simple protein drink. As Morrison and Duncan took one final look around, they couldn't shake the feeling that Shawn's death wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. When Morrison and Duncan continued their investigation through the rest of the house, they found an open gallon of antifreeze sitting on a shelf in the garage next to Shawn's prized 1967 Ford Mustang, a car he had spent years restoring before the accident. The sight of it gave Duncan a strange feeling. The detectives ordered a full autopsy. Jillian Sullivan, 30, was known in the community as a devoted wife, often seen pushing Shawn's wheelchair at the parkour, sitting beside him at their local church. She had worked as a nurse assistant before quitting to care for Shawn full-time. But as the detective peeled back the layers of her seemingly perfect marriage, a different story began to emerge in the months leading up to Shawn's death. Jillian's behavior had changed. Neighbors recalled seeing her leave the house at odd hours, dressed in outfits that didn't seem appropriate for simple errands. When questioned by the detectives, Jillian appeared distraught. She clutched tissues, her hands shaking as she spoke of her love for Shawn. She insisted she had nothing to do with his death, painting herself as a grieving widow. But the detectives couldn't shake the feeling that Jillian was hiding something. The toxicology report couldn't come soon enough. When the toxicology report came back days later, the findings were shocking. Shawn had ethylene glycol in his system, the primary ingredient in antifreeze. The slow poisoning had led to kidney failure, mimicking complications from his existing war injuries. It could have been mistaken for natural causes, if not for one crucial detail: bruising around Shawn's nose and mouth. The mark suggested he had been smothered after he was already weakened by the poison. Someone had made sure he wouldn't wake up. This was no longer a tragic death. It was murder. Morrison and Duncan turned their attention back to Jillian, combing through her phone records and financial statements. The phone records revealed late-night calls to an unknown number, often lasting over an hour. Financial records showed a purchase from a local Walmart just 2 weeks before Shawn's death. A bottle of antifreeze. Surveillance footage confirmed it. Jillian, dressed in a pink hoodie and leggings, was clearly visible at the checkout counter, paying for a bottle of antifreeze and several boxes of condoms. Then came the internet searches on Jillian's laptop, queries that sent chills down the detective's spines. Terms like undetectable poisons and how long does antifreeze take to kill someone had been deleted, but forensic specialists were Able to recover them, Jillian had tried to cover her tracks, but the evidence was piling up Morrison, and Duncan knew they were dealing with something cold and calculated. Shawn Sullivan had survived the war only to be betrayed in his own home by the person he trusted most. Now the only question that remained, why Jillian's financial records added to detective suspicions. Just weeks before Shawn's death, she had taken out a life insurance policy in his name worth $500,000. The timing was too convenient, even more. Damning was a deleted text recovered from her phone. It had been sent to an unknown contact the night before Shawn died. "It's almost done soon. We'll be free," as the evidence-mounted police brought in Jillian for further questioning. This time she was less composed. She avoided eye contact, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. When detectives presented the toxicology report, her demeanor shifted. The initials, Hawk on her face, quickly turned to anger. She leaned forward, her voice rising as she demanded to know if they were accusing her of murder. The detectives took note of her defensive tone. They had seen this reaction before, suspects trying to control the narrative when asked whether she had purchased antifreeze. Jillian hesitated before admitting she had, claiming it was for their car, but Shawn's vehicle was well maintained, and his mechanic confirmed there had been no need for antifreeze in months. Jillian insisted she had nothing to do with Shawn's death. She painted herself as a grieving widow, but the facts told a different story here. Erratic behavior, the secret communications, the financial motive, all of it pointed in one direction. The case against Jillian was building, but investigators still had one critical question. Had she acted alone? Dr. Norton Hollingsworth, 52, was well regarded in Mobile's medical community, a specialist in rehabilitation medicine. He had been treating Shawn Sullivan for nearly a year, overseeing his pain management and physical therapy. His office, located in a busy medical plaza near Providence Hospital, was known for its work with veterans recovering from battlefield injuries. Shawn's medical records showed he had been experiencing worsening symptoms in the months leading up to his death: fatigue, nausea, confusion. Each time he reported these issues, Dr. Hollingsworth adjusted his medications, believing they were related to nerve damage from the explosion that had left Shawn partially paralyzed. But when the toxicology report revealed the presence of ethylene glycol, investigators had serious concerns. If Shawn had been showing classic symptoms of poisoning, why hadn't his doctor noticed? Detectives brought Dr. Hollingsworth in for questioning. He appeared tired, his hands fidgeting as he spoke. He explained that Shawn's symptoms mirrored those of chronic pain sufferers: dizziness, muscle weakness, and exhaustion. He had prescribed stronger painkillers and muscle relaxants, hoping to make his patient more comfortable. The realization that Shawn had actually been poisoned weighed heavily on him. Dr. Hollingsworth had no criminal record, no financial ties to Jillian, and no history of unethical behavior. His prescriptions had been appropriate for Shah's medical conditions, till the detectives combed through his financial records, phone logs, and patient files, searching for anything that could suggest wrongdoing. One discovery gave detectives pause. Dr. Hollingsworth and Jillian Sullivan had exchanged several late-night phone calls in the weeks before Shawn's death. When questioned about them, Dr. Hollingsworth insisted they were professional, related to Shawn's care. He explained that Jillian had seemed worried about her husband's declining health and had called him frequently for advice. But detectives wondered, was she really just a concerned wife? Or was she manipulating the doctor to cover her tracks? Looking deeper into Jillian's background, police learned she had a history of switching doctors for Shawn. She had moved him from one specialist to another, often citing dissatisfaction with their care. Dr. Hollingsworth was the first to trust Jillian, completely never suspecting she'd been slowly poisoning her husband. After thoroughly reviewing his records, detectives determined that Dr. Hollingsworth had been an unwitting participant in Jillian's scheme. He had misdiagnosed Shawn, but he had not been involved in his murder. On November 20th, 2013, detectives received a major break in the case. Digital forensic experts, analyzing Shawn Sullivan's phone, uncovered a voice memo recorded the night before his death. It was nearly 2 minutes long, and what it contained sent chills through the investigation team in the recording. Shawn sounded weak but determined. He confronted Jillian about an affair. His voice was slurred, likely due to the poison already in his system, but his words were unmistakable. He knew something was wrong. He suspected she had been lying to him. Jillian's response was cold, calculated. You were supposed to die over there. Detectives played there, cording over and over. The implications were staggering. Over there could only mean Afghanistan. Had Jillian wished for his death in combat? Had she waited for him to come home just to kill him? Herself, they dug deeper into Jillian's past. She and Shawn had met at an army medical center where she was working as a nurse assistant. Shawn was visiting a sick friend who introduced them. Their relationship had moved fast, too fast. Some of Shawn's friends later admitted within just a few months they were married after a whirlwind romance. Shawn called it love at first sight. His friends called it lust at first sight. But what if Jillian had already been involved with someone else, unbeknownst to Shawn? Jillian had hidden her past ASA stripper at a popular gentleman's club. She had been a favorite among the male clientele and had numerous lovers, some of whom she continued seeing and sleeping with even after marrying Shawn. The detectives dug deeper. They expanded their search. Jillian's phone records revealed frequent contact with several men, but one name came up more than any other. Keith Hughes. Then came another lead. Security footage from a gas station near the Sullivans' home showed Jillian in the passenger seat of a Blackford F-150 parked for over an hour, engaged in a sexual encounter with an unidentified man. The footage was captured just 2 nights before Shawn's death. The truck was later traced back to Keith Hughes. With this new evidence, the detectives had a second suspect. If Jillian had been poisoning Shawn for months, had she acted alone? Or was someone helping her? Investigators believed Shawn had begun piecing things together. In his final days, he may have suspected Jillian was unfaithful. He may have started questioning why his health was deteriorating. But by the time he recorded that a voice memo, it was too late. Now detectives had a clearer picture of what had happened. Jillian had not just wanted Shawn dead. She had expected it, and she may not have been the only one involved. This was no longer just a case of a wife betraying her husband. It was a deadly conspiracy. Keith Hughes, 23, was well known in Mobile's downtown bar scene. He worked nights at a popular spot where live music and strong drinks kept the place packed. When he wasn't behind the bar, he was chasing dreams of making it big. As a country rock musician, playing small gigs at local venues, to many he seemed like just another struggling artist trying to make ends meet. But the detectives soon learned that Keith was much more than that. He was Jillian Sullivan's secret lover. The detectives first uncovered Keith's connection to Jillian through her phone records. She had called him nearly a dozen times in the days leading up to Shawn's death. A deeper dive into her history revealed even more troubling evidence. Buried among everyday messages was a string of emails exchanged between Jillian and Keith. The subject lines were vague, but the content was anything but. They spoke in code about their future together, about how things would be easier soon. One message stood out. Jillian had forwarded Keith a copy of Shawn's 500 Indrojo life insurance policy. Detectives brought Keith in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. He insisted he had nothing to do with Shawn's death, and claimed Jillian had told him she was leaving her husband, not planning his murder. But when confronted with the emails, his story changed. Keith admitted that he knew Jillian was poisoning Shawn. She had told him it was a slow, painless process. He swore he had never handled the antifreeze himself, but he also didn't try to stop her. Instead, he had encouraged her, telling her to do what she had. To detectives pressed him further. Had he played a more active role? Could he have smothered Shawn once the poison had weakened him? Keith shook his head and swore he had no part in that. He claimed Jillian had promised him they would be together, that once Shawn was gone, they could take the life insurance money and start fresh, maybe even move to Nashville. So he could finally get his big break. As the detectives continued their questioning, Keith's confidence crumbled. He had thought he was just playing along with Jillian's plan, not realizing he was now tangled in a murder investigation. His dream of a new life was shattered. Instead of fame and fortune, he now faced the possibility of life behind bars with Keith's confession. Detectives had what they needed. Jillian had not acted alone. She had manipulated, planned, and convinced others to help her. Shawn's death was not just a crime of passion, it was a cold, calculated conspiracy. On the morning of November 22nd, 2013, officers from the Mobile Police Department arrived at Jillian Sullivan's home with an arrest warrant. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee. In her hands, scrolling through her phone, a half-eaten cheese Danish sat on a plate beside her. The quiet morning scenes hattered the moment she looked up and saw the officers at her door. Jillian's expression shifted from confusion to shock as detectives informed her of the charges: first-degree murder, conspiracy, and insurance fraud. Her hands trembled and her face turned pale. She tried to compose herself, shaking her head as if refusing to believe what was happening. "This is a mistake." "Done," she mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper. But the evidence told a different story. The detectives had built a rock-solid case. Shawn's autopsy had confirmed poisoning and asphyxiation. The digital forensics team had uncovered damning emails between Jillian and her lover Keith Hughes. Surveillance footage from a local Walmart showed Jillian purchasing antifreeze just weeks before Shawn's death. And then there was the chilling voice memo, Shawn's final recording, where he confronted Jillian about her. A barrenly to be met with a cryptic, incriminating response. The arrest sent shock waves through the community. Jillian had always played the role of the caring wife, the former nurse assistant who had stood by Shawn through his injuries. But behind closed doors, she'd slowly and methodically planned his death. Shawn's family, especially his sister Sylvie Sullivan, was devastated, but not entirely surprised. Sylvie had long suspected that Jillian's love for Shawn had faded. At first, she thought it was due to the stress of caring for him, but now it was clear Jillian hadn't seen Shawn as a husband anymore. She had seen him as an obstacle. As the police led Jillian out of her home, reporters had already gathered outside. News of the arrest spread quickly, making headlines across Alabama and beyond. Local news stations covered the case by evening. Social media was flooded with comments, theories, and outrage. True crime forums buzzed with discussions about the shocking murder plot. Jillian was booked into the Mobile County Metro Jail, where she was held without bail. As she sat in her cold cell that night, the reality of her situation finally began to sink in. The life she had meticulously planned, the life insurance payout, the fresh start with Keith was gone instead. A freedom she now faced